Welcome back. Wherever you are right now, however dark the room, however loud the thoughts still sound in your head, I want you to know something before we begin. Tonight's story is about fear. Real fear. The kind that closes in around you the moment the light goes out, when you're left alone with everything you didn't have time to feel today. But it's also about something else. Something that doesn't cancel the fear out, but sits right beside it, holds its hand, stays long after it should have given up and gone home. You don't have to stop being afraid to be safe tonight. That's not how this works. Not for you, and not so very long ago, for a man who spent one whole night in the dark, surrounded by exactly what should have ended him. So let your shoulders drop just a little. Let your jaw unclench. You don't need to do anything else right now except listen, and let the story carry you the rest of the way. Nothing is required of you tonight except this: staying just as you are, wrapped in whatever blankets or silence you found for yourself, and letting someone else's very old, very real fear slowly become something you can rest inside of, instead of something that keeps you awake. Let's begin. Close your eyes if they aren't already. Feel the weight of the blankets over you, the small, steady rhythm of your own breath, in and out, needing no instruction from me. I won't ask you to change it. Just notice that it's there. Some things hold you up without ever being told to. Now let the room around you soften at the edges, the way a lamp looks through half-closed eyes, every hard corner gone gold and blurred. And let's go back, further than your walls, further than tonight. Back to a city with high clay walls and torches guttering along stone corridors. A palace built by men who believed their power would outlast the stars themselves. This was once Babylon, though by now new kings sit on old thrones. Persian kings, ruling a kingdom too vast for any single man to hold in his two hands. It's night there, too. The same kind of night you're lying in right now. Somewhere in that palace, oil lamps are being trimmed low one by one. Somewhere, a guard shifts his weight on tired feet. And somewhere else, in a modest upper room, its window thrown open toward a home he hasn't seen in decades, an old man kneels. You can almost hear it if you let yourself. The particular hush of an ancient city settling into sleep. Dogs quieting in distant streets. The last cartwheels creaking home over packed dirt roads. A whole world, unimaginably far from your own bed, and yet somehow not so different after all, when night falls and everyone in it turns, one by one, toward rest. His name was Daniel, and this is the night everything was decided. Not by armies, not by kings, but by one very old, very quiet man's refusal to be afraid of the wrong things. Daniel was old now, old enough that his hands trembled faintly when he lifted them to pray, old enough that nearly everyone who'd known him young was gone. He had come to this land as a boy, torn from a small hill country far to the west, taught a foreign language he'd once stumbled clumsily over, given a new name he never quite answered to in his own heart, even 60 years later. He remembered, if he let himself, the smell of his mother's kitchen more clearly than he remembered most of what had happened to him only last week. The way very old memories sometimes outlast the newer ones, settling deeper the longer a person lives. Decades had passed since that first frightened journey. Kings had risen and fallen around him the way seasons do, one bleeding quietly into the next, and Daniel had somehow outlasted nearly all of them. serving each in turn with the same careful, unshowy excellence. Now, under this newest king, Darius, ruler of a vast Persian realm carved into 120 provinces, each with its own prince and 3 presidents set above them all to keep account, Daniel was one of those 3. And, if the whispers in the palace corridors were to be believed, the very best of them. Through all of it, every king, every rearranged title, every fresh wave of younger officials eager to prove themselves, Daniel had kept one small, steady habit that never once changed. 3 times a day, he climbed the stairs to his upper room, opened the window that faced toward the home he could barely still picture, and prayed. Not in secret, not with any drama attached to it, just quietly. The way you might check on a sleeping child before you go to bed yourself, or set a kettle on to boil out of pure habit. A practice worn smooth by 10,000 repetitions. It should have been the single most unremarkable thing about him. But Daniel was also undeniably brilliant. So clearly gifted that the new king, Darius, had begun to trust him above almost everyone else in the kingdom. Word had even reached the other officials that the king meant to set Daniel over the entire realm. Over all of them. Every last one. And that is exactly where the trouble began. Not with Daniel's faith, with other men's fear of being made smaller by it. They went looking for something, anything, to use against him. Some careless decision made in haste. Some stolen coin tucked away where no one would think to look. Some old failure they could drag out into the light and hold up for the king to see. They combed through years of his decisions, his accounts, his judgments. They found nothing. Not one loose thread anywhere. Not one careless hour in decades of service. Daniel was, infuriatingly for them, exactly as honest as he appeared to be, all the way down to the very bottom of him. So, one evening, a small cluster of them gathered in a shadowed courtyard. The kind of gathering that only happens in low voices, heads bent close together, and admitted to one another what they'd really known from the start. They would never catch this man doing wrong. But they knew, because everyone in the palace knew, exactly when and where he prayed. Openly, predictably, like clockwork built into the very shape of his life. So they turned instead to the one part of him they couldn't touch directly, and decided, quietly, in that darkened courtyard, to use it against him. They came to King Darius together, all of them, with flattering words prepared in advance, and a trap dressed up carefully as an honor. Let it be decreed, they said, bowing low, that for 30 full days no one anywhere in the kingdom may pray to any god or man except the king himself. A mark, they said, of how completely this kingdom loves and reveres him. Anyone who breaks the law, they added, almost as an afterthought, will be thrown into the den of lions. To a proud king, freshly settled into an enormous new throne, it sounded like nothing but devotion, like loyalty carved permanently into law, a gift from grateful subjects. He didn't see the blade hidden carefully inside it. He called for the parchment. He pressed his own signet ring into warm wax, sealing it before the ink had even fully dried. And under the ancient law of the Medes and Persians, a law even kings were bound by, strange as that sounds, once a decree was sealed, it could not be unsealed. Not even by the king who wrote it. Not even if he changed his mind an hour later, alone in his chambers, turning the ring over and over on his own finger. Word of the new law spread through the palace before the ink had even fully dried. Daniel heard it too. Someone must have told him, gently or not so gently, exactly what it meant. That his small, ordinary habit of prayer had just become, overnight, a crime worth dying for. And here is where I want you to slow all the way down with me and really see him. Because this is the moment so many of us live inside, over and over, in smaller ways, on ordinary nights of our own. The moment fear hands you a very reasonable excuse to just stop. Just this once, just to be safe. Daniel went home. He climbed the same stairs he'd climbed for years. He opened the same window, facing the same direction it always had. He did not close the shutters. He did not lower his voice to a careful, hidden whisper. He knelt exactly the way he always knelt, at exactly the hour he always prayed. He was afraid. I don't think we should pretend otherwise, even in a story meant to comfort you. Fear doesn't ask permission before it arrives. Not for old men, and not for young ones, and not for you either. But Daniel had learned, across an entire lifetime, that being afraid and being faithful were never truly opposites. They could sit in the very same body, at the very same time, without either one canceling out the other. Perhaps he thought, just then, of every other night across 60 years when he'd knelt at this same window with far smaller worries pressing on him, and how each time morning had eventually come anyway, the way it always does, whether or not he'd managed to feel brave in the meantime. He did not know, kneeling there with the window open to the cool night air, how this would end. He only knew that he was already, somehow, safe in the dark, even before the danger had fully arrived. Not because nothing bad could happen to him, but because whatever happened next, he would not be facing it alone. Of course, the men watching for exactly this moment saw him. They always do. They hurried back to the king, almost giddy with their small triumph. The very man Darius had planned to promote above them all, caught red-handed, breaking the king's own new law. And here the story does something you might not expect from a king. King Darius wasn't pleased at all. He was distressed, genuinely, deeply troubled, the old accounts say, because he cared for Daniel, more than he'd perhaps realized until this very moment, and because he understood, far too late, exactly what he had signed his own name to. He spent the rest of that day searching for some way out. He called for his advisors, one after another, asking the same desperate question in different words each time. He read back through the decree himself, searching the careful legal language for some clause, some loophole, some crack he could work his fingers into. He found nothing. The law of the Medes and Persians did not bend, not for kings, not for regret, not even for a friendship he was only now, in his panic, realizing had meant far more to him than he'd ever once said aloud. By the time the sun began sinking toward the rooftops, Darius had run out of both options and time. So, as the sun went down that evening, staining the palace walls a deep and final gold, Daniel was led out to a deep stone den carved into the hillside beyond the palace grounds. I won't describe the animals to you in much detail, only that they were large and hungry and entirely capable of ending a man's life in a matter of moments. That part of the story is true, and I won't pretend it away just to make you more comfortable. But I also won't linger there, because that isn't actually where this story is pointing. Above the den, high in the curved stone ceiling, there was a single, narrow opening, barely wider than a man's shoulders, that let in a thin blade of sky. By day, it let in light. By night, if the sky was clear, it let in stars. The king himself spoke to Daniel there, at the mouth of the den, before the great round stone was rolled into place. His voice, the old accounts say, was heavy with something close to grief, barely holding steady. "Your God," he said, "whom you serve so continually, may he deliver you." Not quite a command, not really even a hope the king fully believed yet, if we're honest with ourselves. Just a wish, spoken out loud into the darkening air, the way you might whisper something into the dark, simply because you need to say it to someone, anyone, even if you're not entirely sure they're listening. Then the great stone was rolled over the mouth of the den, sealed with the king's own signet and the signets of his nobles, so that no one, not even Darius himself, could quietly undo what had been done. Guarded through the night. Final. And Daniel was alone in the dark, with the lions. I want you to imagine, just for a moment, what that must have sounded like. Not looked like, sounded like. Because in that kind of darkness, sound is almost all a person has left to hold on to. The scrape of claws somewhere against stone, the low, rough breathing of large animals shifting their weight nearby, unseen. His own heartbeat, far too loud in his own ears, counting out minutes that refused to move any faster. Every sense he owned, straining toward a danger he couldn't see coming, only feel gathering, somewhere close, in the dark around him. High above him, through that narrow opening in the stone ceiling, a few stars became visible as the last light drained out of the sky. Small and impossibly far away. He found, without quite meaning to, that he kept lifting his eyes toward them, the same way he'd lifted his eyes toward his own window every single day for 60 years. And underneath all of it, underneath the claws, the breathing, the pounding of his own heart, quieter than the fear but somehow steadier too, something else. Safe in the dark, not because the den held no danger, it held plenty, more than enough to end him, but because Daniel was not, in the way that mattered most, truly alone inside it. We don't know exactly how he spent those long hours. Whether he prayed the whole night through, murmuring into the blackness the same familiar words he'd said every day of his adult life, or simply sat with his back against the cold stone wall, breathing slowly, waiting for whatever would come next. Maybe both, at different points, in different hours. Maybe fear arrived in waves, the way it does for all of us, rising and receding, rising and receding. And maybe, each time it crested, that same quiet steadiness rose up to meet it, patient as a tide against a shore that has weathered far worse storms than this one. At some point, deep in the night, the old accounts suggest, he may even have slept, briefly, fitfully, the way exhausted bodies sometimes overrule frightened minds despite every reason not to. And if he did, I imagine it was the kind of sleep that only comes when a person has finally run out of ways to stay afraid, and simply has to trust because there's genuinely nothing left to do but that. The lions did not come near him. Not because they'd lost their nature somewhere in the dark, not because anyone had tamed them beforehand or fed them well enough to dull their hunger, simply because that particular night something stood between Daniel and what should have found him in that room. Scripture calls it an angel. I like to think of it, some nights, more simply than that, as a kind of presence so complete, so absolute, that even the hungriest, most dangerous parts of that room understood, without needing to be told twice, that this man was not theirs to touch. Hour by hour, the thin blade of sky above him shifted from black to a deep and softening blue, to something almost silver. Somewhere in that slow shift, too gradual to name the exact moment it happened, the worst of the fear had loosened its grip on him, just slightly. Not gone, just loosened, enough to breathe around. Meanwhile, high above the den, in rooms lined with soft cushions and warm lamplight that felt, that night, more like mockery than comfort, King Darius could not sleep. He fasted that whole night through. He asked for no music to be brought to him, no dancers, no wine, nothing to dull the edges of what he'd done. He paced the length of his own chambers more times than anyone bothered counting, pausing again and again at the window that faced, roughly, toward that sealed stone den somewhere beyond the palace walls. He simply lay awake, eventually, in the dark of his own grand palace, carrying his own private version of Daniel's fear. The fear of having handed someone he genuinely cared for over to something he could no longer undo, no matter how much power he supposedly held over an entire kingdom. Two men, that night, in two very different kinds of darkness, one surrounded by lions, one surrounded by guilt, both waiting for the very same morning to arrive. At the very first hint of gray light along the horizon, the king could wait no longer. He rose. The old story tells us he ran, this powerful man, robes gathered up in his own fists like a boy late for something urgent, down through the still sleeping palace, past guards too startled to do anything but step aside, out to the great stone that sealed the den, his voice already breaking before he'd even fully arrived. "Daniel," he called out, "servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve so continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And from inside the den, from inside all that darkness, that whole long night of it, a voice answered back. Steady, unhurried, almost gentle, the way you might reassure someone who had clearly worried far more than you had. "O King, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions, so that they have not harmed me at all, because I was found innocent before him." Safe in the dark, all night long, not untested, untouched. The king's joy, they say, was almost too large for him to hold inside his own chest. He gave the command at once, and men strained together to roll the heavy stone aside, and Daniel was lifted up out of that den, up out of the dark, up out of the danger, into the pale gold light of an entirely ordinary morning that must have felt to him like the single most extraordinary thing he had ever seen with his own eyes in 80 long years of living. And when they examined him, really looked at him closely, in the full and honest light of day, they found no wound anywhere on his body, not a scratch, not a single bruise, Not even the small, ordinary aches of a man who'd sat all night on cold stone. Nothing at all. Because he had trusted in his God, and his God had held him through the entirety of it, from the first stone rolled into place to the last. Not long after, they say, King Darius sent out a new decree of his own to every corner of that vast kingdom, 120 provinces, more languages than he could ever count. Not a law demanding worship of himself this time, a decree that all people, everywhere under his rule, should tremble with reverence before the God of Daniel, the living God, who rescues and delivers and works wonders in heaven and on earth. The God who had shut the mouths of lions for one faithful old man in the dark, and asked nothing of him in return, except that he go on doing, quietly, exactly what he had always done. I tell you this story tonight, not so you'll admire Daniel from some safe, comfortable distance, but so you'll recognize something true about your own dark room. Whatever is closing in around you tonight, and I don't need to know exactly what it is to know that something is. It might not disappear simply because you fall asleep. That's all right. That's not a failure of faith, or of this story, or of you. Daniel's night wasn't safe because the lions were removed. It was safe because he wasn't left to face them without any company at all. Maybe your version of the den is a diagnosis you're still waiting on, a conversation you're dreading tomorrow morning, a silence and a relationship that used to be so full of noise. Maybe it's smaller than that and stranger, just a low hum of dread you can't quite name, following you quietly from room to room. I'm not going to tell you it isn't real. I'm not going to tell you to simply stop feeling it, as if that were ever that easy. I'm only going to tell you what the story already told you, far more gently than I ever could on my own. You're allowed to be afraid and safe in the very same breath. Those two things were never truly enemies. They only look that way from the outside, looking in. Think for a moment of every night you've already survived that you were once so sure you wouldn't. You are, quite literally, a person with a perfect record of getting through hard nights so far. That's not nothing. And it isn't only luck either. That's evidence. Somewhere tonight, whatever is keeping watch over you doesn't need you to solve your fear before it's willing to stay close. It simply stays. The way it stayed with one old man in a stone room, all through one very long night, so many years ago, that the story has had time to grow gentle in the retelling, but was, for him, entirely and terrifyingly real while it was actually happening. So let the fear be there tonight if it must be. Let it sit somewhere near the foot of the bed if that's where it likes to live for you. But underneath it, quieter, steadier, and so much more patient than the fear ever is, let something else settle in too. Safe in the dark. Not because the night has no teeth of its own, but because you were never actually asked to face it by yourself. It's all right to let go now. Whatever tomorrow is asking of you, it can wait a few more hours. Right now, there's only this, your breath, the quiet weight of the dark around you, and the same steady truth that has followed you all the way to the end of this story. You are safe in the dark tonight, not because nothing at all waits out there in it, but because you are not facing it alone.
Whatever tomorrow holds, it will still be there when you wake, patient as ever. It doesn't need you to carry it through the night. Nothing does. May you sleep the way Daniel finally did, somewhere deep in that long night, not because every danger had passed, but because you were, even then, being watched over far more closely than you knew. Rest now. Let your thoughts grow slower, quieter, further apart from each other. Sleep well.